We are now joined by a very special guest, Mik Aoki, head coach here at the University of Richmond. First and foremost, thanks so much for having us and taking the time to sit down today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you.
So my first question for you, and we kind of talked a little bit about this beforehand, what is your message to fans of this program, to people who don't know a lot about this program, about what makes not only the school and this university special, but your program as well?
Big question. I would say, I think the most obvious, sort of the lowest hanging fruit is that we are a top 20, top 25, national liberal arts university, right? So academically, we are amongst the best in the country with like the NESCAC schools and places like Pomona Pitzer out west and things like that. And then I think the other part of it is, a lot of the really high academic small liberal arts schools tend to be Division III schools. And so I think the thing that makes us unique is that we're a Division I program competing in the Atlantic 10. And I think that we, in this day and age of all of the stuff that you read about the portal and the NIL and all these different types of things, I think that we still, as a university, as an athletic department, and certainly in our program, really value the idea of development, not just as baseball players, but as people and as students and all of that, and making certain that these kids leave our program with more than just learning how to throw a slider a little bit better or hit a slider a little bit better, right? I think that part of it is really important. I think that as I matured in the profession, I think that was one of the things that I started to really latch onto, was the idea that as a coach you have a pretty powerful platform to hopefully affect kids' lives in a really positive way, to help them to discover who they are and what they want to be and what they want to stand for, and that they go out beyond the walls of the University of Richmond and become really positive parts of the communities in which they live.
So when you talk about being, a high academic, small liberal arts school, you mentioned those things that seem like core kind of components of your program. What type of kid does it take to be a good fit for the program? What does it take, internally, but, a little bit externally as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things, obviously when we're out on the road recruiting and you watch, obviously the talent piece has to speak for itself, and as a kid that hopefully will help get our program a little bit better for him having joined it. But it doesn't matter if it's like I get to see the next Mike Trout. If his GPA is a 2.7, we're not going to get him at the school. So the easy part of the external part is that they also have had to have performed at a pretty high level in the classroom in high school. I think internally, I think that number one, I think they have to understand that academics, getting an education, getting a degree from a place like Richmond is something that they need to understand at some level or another, that it's important, because it's not going to be easy for them here, right? We don't have tons and tons of online classes for our undergrads. They're going to be in class. They're going to be interacting with professors and fellow students and different things like that. And so they have to have the intellectual horsepower to be able to do that, and they have to work hard to be able to do that. And if they don't, at some level or another, value that, then, they're going to be on their Xbox at night wasting time and not doing what they need to be doing. And then the other part, I think, is, in our program, I think that I've never been the coach who's going to handhold the kid to go to class or to handhold the kid, and I don't want to have to coach motivation. I get that, hey, sometimes maybe on a Tuesday and it's, 40 degrees and it's a little drizzly, that the guys aren't all that excited about playing. But at the end of the day, I don't want to coach the kid who doesn't want to try to be the best version of himself in the classroom, in the community, on the baseball field, right? And so I think finding that part of it out is important. I think that the kid who wants to get better, who's got that growth-minded mindset to try to get better, I think those are the kids that at some level or another thrive in the types of situations that I've coached in.
I feel like kind of a bunch of things in college athletics all happened what felt like at the same time. You mentioned NIL, you talk about the portal, and then you also talk about online classes, which really have kind of blown up since COVID, obviously. And you talk about how you don't have a lot of that for undergrads here at this institution. Why do you think that's a good thing? Spin that positively, because I feel like we have become more sheltered as student athletes, and you're not living that same college experience as you used to maybe 20, 30 years ago. Even as an athlete, it's become more kind of closed off. Why is it important to kind of, do you think, for those kids to go sit in the class and be around their peers more than just being around their teammates?
Yeah, I think that part is really important. I think that there's some advantages, obviously, of the online thing. But I think that, one of the things, I mean, I have high school aged, I had a high schooler who was in COVID, right? And trying to get him out of bed to get for online education was like one of the worst things I've ever had to go through as a parent. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, if that's the worst thing I have to go through as a parent, I've led a charmed life. But that was really tough. But I think it might not even be. I do think that the educational piece, like the learning piece, is stickier in person than it is online. But I think even more importantly is the ability to articulate thoughts, to learn to appreciate. You don't necessarily have to completely agree with somebody else's perspective, but I think learning to respect and appreciate it, I think, is something that has completely gone, right, in our society. I think that you can probably trace back a lot of issues in our society as a whole to the idea that it's like the Twitterification of the world, right? Mm-hmm. This is my idea, and then if somebody disagrees with it, all they do is dump on my idea, and send me hate comments and all that sort of thing, and then it's just sort of back and forth. I think that part of being able to look somebody else in the eye, contribute to a discussion. You have to be prepared to go to class to have discussions. And again, this place is pretty small, and so our classes, as a result, they're pretty small, especially when you get into some of the upper level classes. And so as a result, there's a lot of that interplay. There's a lot of that group dynamic. There's a lot of group working together and going back and forth in the class. And at some level or another, too, I think, I've told this to players in the past, is like, when you're the guy who participates and you raise your hand and you think you have the answer right and the professor says, well, it's not quite right, when he or she corrects you or somebody else in the class corrects you, I feel like that lesson sticks, right, more than when the professor just says, oh, yeah, that's right, that was right. It's kind of like, whatever, you strike out looking on, the fastball right down the middle because you were guessing with 2 strikes. And then I come back and go, were you guessing with 2 strikes? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, let's let that be a lesson to not do that anymore, right? They'll probably go back to guessing with 2 strikes. But I feel like screwing up, it makes the lesson a little bit stickier.
And then building that type of character and those things maybe off the field. And you talked about building people for, postgraduate too, careers afterwards. At the same time, how does that help lead to wins on the field, which at the end of the day is in your job description? Yeah,
100% it is. I think that when you have a group of high character individuals, and I think that's what, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to develop, is that they're going to work together better, right? They're going to they're going to do what they say that they're going to do. They're going to hold themselves accountable. Hopefully they're holding each other accountable to all that sort of stuff. All of the team dynamics, because you think about baseball, a baseball team spends more time with one another than any other sport that there is, right? We go on the road for 4 straight days with one another, and our pre-games sometimes last as long as an entire game for other sports, right? And so we spend so much time with one another that if you don't have the ability to respect one another, to be guys that live with integrity and all those different types of things, I think the team dynamic is going to suffer for you. And so I think by helping to develop high character individuals and high integrity individuals, I think all you're doing is to help create a culture where kids want to be a part of it, that kids want to strive. They're competing with one another in a really positive way. They're competing with one another while they're still rooting and cheering and helping for one another,
And then you mentioned, being a development program. We've talked about a lot of the great stuff that goes into it off the field. What about on the field? What kind of staff does it take to be able to implement all of the kind of developmental ideas? And in today's world of baseball, there's so many different resources. There's so many different tools you can use. As a head coach, you kind of have to filter everything and organize it. What does that take, and what kind of staff does that take to help you kind of implement that?
I think from a staff standpoint, I think it's the biggest thing that I could say is guys that are relational or people who are relational, right? I believe very strongly in the old adage about, they don't care what you know until they know you care. And I think that our guys do a really good job with that, right? Kyle is pretty new to us, but I think even already our guys understand that, he cares about them more than just the ability to hit or hit a baseball or steal a base. Josh, I think, has been here. Obviously, he predated me getting here, and I think he's the same type of guy, right? I think he's like disappointed and excited for their pitchers with every up and down, kind of like a parent is for their kids. Colin has been great with it. He's a guy who's, I think he's very much into the relational part of it, getting to know these kids, and so I think that part of it is really, really important. Obviously, the technology and one of the things that I've made a bit of a primary focus is to be a place that really embraces the technology piece. But at the end of the day, like being able to distill that, right? The kid still has to trust you, which comes back to the relational part of it, right? And I think that part of it, I think, is more than anything else. Matt does a great job with these guys. We like to give Matt a lot of grief around here, but it's, he's grown into being a really, really good with that. The kids trust him. The kids know that he has their best interest at heart, and I think that all of us, I think that that's what it takes to be able to distill whatever information it is that's coming out of a TrackMan or, the hit tracks or a blast or any of the pressure plates or any of those different types of things. You have to be able to distill that, one, in a way that they can understand it, and two, they have to be able to trust you that the stuff that you're saying is like we have their best interest at heart.
I would love to get into the data a little bit, but before we get there, you've been coaching for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Have kids changed, in your opinion, just overall, the way they are? Or do you see any differences in how they maybe react or kind of what makes them tick than, before when you're just getting started?
I don't know. You go back and forth on that, and I think it's easy to say that, kids are changed. But I think that every generation looks at the next generation and says, well, they're different, right? And I don't know, I would hope that that's kind of evolution, right? That we're evolving in a better way. I think the one thing that I'd like to be able to see, and I'm the demographic that probably created this in our kids, right, is that I think that this particular generation has a little bit more of a fear of failure than any generation that sort of has come before, right? And, I don't know if it's because on any social media post you're not putting the post where, like a bird just turded on you as you're walking down the street, right? I mean, it's like everything is the best. And I think, there's been a lot of competition throughout their lives, right, to get into the best travel team, or, we need to get the best SAT score, we need to get the best GPA, or we need to get this. And so I think there's a little bit of it where I find myself encouraging our guys on the field to take risks, to fail, to fall down. And I think the fall, especially with this year's team, we have a pretty young team in comparison to last year's, and I find myself encouraging them, hey, let's go fail a lot. Let's go make mistakes, because we can learn from those mistakes. Let's see if we can steal this base. Let's see what it takes to be able to advance on this particular dirt ball read. Let's do all these different things, and let's fail a lot so that we expand our comfort zone a little bit and get a little bit better as a result of it. But outside of that, the kids over the years, I mean, I've been at pretty high academic places for the vast majority of my career, and I think they all, they're kids that want to do well. They're kids that I've been fortunate to be able to coach kids that have been driven to do well on the baseball field, in the classroom, to be good people. And so from that standpoint, I think that's probably the only one that I would point out, is I think that there's a little bit more of a fear of failure than there used to be.
You want to break them of that fear of failure, and you talk about kind of part of that is letting them know that, like, hey, let's go experience it so you can kind of get through it and move past it. What type of situations are you creating in practice, maybe settings? Is it certain drills, or are you just creating challenging environments so that they can learn those lessons in the practice setting, and then you can go back and kind of reteach it? Is that kind of how that process goes?
Yeah, I liken that whole process a lot to weightlifting.
Okay.
Right? Is that at the end of the day, you have to stress your muscles on a regular basis in order to be able to gain strength, right? I mean, that's sort of how it works, is that, the central nervous system, it gets sort of fired up, and this knucklehead continues to, like, lift these heavy things, and so all of a sudden, the things start happening to be able to tolerate that stress. But you don't want to put, if a kid is capable of benching 200 pounds, you don't want to put 500 pounds on there and go, oh yeah, this will be a really good stressor, right? Because that's going to break the guy, right? And so I think it's the same sort of a thing. I think as it relates to hitting, I think you put some competitive things out there. We put them on the spin ball, or we put them on the triple play machine, and they're not just getting fastballs fed in the same spot, even if it's high velocity. In this day and age, obviously everybody seems to value like the high ride, high spin, the dude with some hop at the top of the zone. And so you put a hack attack down on the ground and you're having them shoot high velocity at it to make them be able to feel how to get on top of it, right? I can't remember who I read a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about, some high ride guy, and he's like, I have to feel like I have to hit something like 2 balls above where it actually is in order to be able to get myself on top and get that feel for it. And so, yeah, I think that you stress them. I think you create environments in which they fail and it challenges them. But you don't want to do it so much that you completely break them like the 500-pound bench press, right, for a dude that can do 200. And so I think that level, that's a little bit different for everybody in the program, right? You might, it doesn't always work out that it's younger versus older, but if you want to just use that as to make it simple, right, you might not stress the younger guy as much as you stress the older guy. In the mound, on the mound, it's competitive bullpens. It's like playing pig while you're throwing bullpens, getting them to put some stress in there. And I'm a huge believer in random practice versus blocked practice, but I also feel as though blocked practice has its place, right? And I think the block practice is for the kid who's trying to make maybe a little bit of a swing adjustment, or maybe make a little bit of a pitch design adjustment or something like that. But then at some level or another, you got to go test it, right? And you have to go test it in an environment that is as messy as what a baseball game looks like, right? Which is part of probably, when our guys say that they want to go to facilities, I think facilities absolutely have their place. I think they're really good. But I also think that facilities, I try to steer them to places that have a competitive environment to the facility, right? Because at the end of the day, especially with the pitchers, this slider might metrically look okay, but you stick 4 guys in there and 3 of them barreled the hell out of it, right? That, I don't care what the metrics say, that slider stinks, right? But on the flip side, it's maybe the slider doesn't look the same as it does when it's just sort of the sterile, I'm throwing to a 9 pocket and trying to get the metric right? Because some level or another, you're not able to take what you're doing in practice and bring it into the messiness of a game with all of the emotion and the adrenaline, and the dude just kicked a ball behind you, and the wind just kicked up, and a ball that should have been an out blows out of the ballpark, and all of those different things. And so I think that, I think you have to stress them, but you don't want to stress them so much that you break them.
So then what's the decision-making process on knowing when to and when to maybe pull back? Because you mentioned, right, that you want to create these environments, and it's great to be in there and chase metrics at certain times when we're designing pitches and stuff like that, but it also has to be able to work against competition. How do you make that decision on, hey, today we need to really get after them and get on top of them about competing and challenge them and show them that they're going to fail and have them fail, versus, okay, hold on, we need to pull back a little bit and maybe have a feel-good day, or however you go about it? Yeah,
I think a lot of that comes through, going back to the relational thing and kind of knowing who your guys are. I also think that sometimes the whole body language thing speaks volumes, right? And the guys are just going down and their heads are hung after a practice. You're like, okay, maybe we need to get them pumped up a little bit more. But I also think it's also to a certain extent, it is built into the 8-hour periods versus the 20-hour periods, right? The 20-hour periods, we're going to focus a lot more on the competitive nature, the team building component. The developmental piece doesn't go away by any means, but I think that you need to be able to have the competitive portion. You need to stretch them in that competitive portion to even know what it is, right? To me, the game, whether it's a practice, like a drill that you come up with for them, right, like a challenging BP, or an actual true game, an inter squad, is the test. All the rest of the stuff that you're doing is all the studying for that test, right? And the test at the end of the day is there to give you an evaluation of, has this person mastered that particular skill? And if they have, then you move on, right? And if they haven't, well, maybe with that kid, you have to get them in for a little bit of extra work and do maybe a little bit more of that blocked practice rather than the random stuff.
You mentioned talking about the 8-hour period versus the 20-hour period and building the developmental times. So much with the aid of tech and how much development we can do nowadays. So much is being focused in the game on the one-on-one battle between pitcher and hitter. And there's a whole other part of the game that has to go on, and it's not the end-all be-all. It's incredibly important. How do you manage, like, okay, this is the time where, like, this is the focus, and then, you know, we have to develop, we need to get better, we need to chase stuff metrically, and then how do you kind of manage, okay, we need to, you know, worry about base running and making sure we're throwing to the right cutoffs men? Is it simply as like, hey, this is our individual periods and this is our team periods, or how do you kind of go about knowing when to push those buttons?
Yeah, in the 20-hour segment, it's definitely a combination. I think that we try to, as much as we can, to have a practice or two a week that does kind of hit on the things that you talk about, bunt defenses, first and thirds, right? All the things that guys got into baseball to do, right? And you know, the cuts and relays and do different things like that so that we do it, so that we have those right, so that guys are in the right place when they need to be in the right place. But I also think that every practice, even if it's not a day that we're scrimmaging, that we do have like a little bit of a competitive component to something that day, right? Somebody wins or loses something. And because I do think that there is a balance to be struck, but I think that, to me, it's like we should all the time be thinking about the developmental piece of getting a little bit better. What can I do better today than I did yesterday? And we're going to fail at that a lot, but without that competitive piece, without like putting a little bit of juice in the game, so to speak, I don't know that like there's enough of like a care factor, right? To where like you get the guys like emotionally a little bit hyped up and get them into a state of arousal to where, you know, that can go really well or it can go really bad. And how do you deal with it when it goes really bad, type of a thing. So I think that part, and that's part of the fun of it, right? I mean, but you know, that mental game component we talk about a ton, and I think that, you know, beyond obviously just first and thirds and bunt defenses, I think that one-on-one battle, the hitter-pitcher, even from a team perspective, right? When things are going wrong, are we the same team that we are when things that are going right? Are you the same pitcher, you know, when things are going great than when things are going poorly? As a hitter, are you affected by the umpire's call, you know, that you didn't think was quite right? I mean, I think that mental game component at the end of the day, it's like I talked to our guys last week about is, you know, we always talk about the 5-tool player, right? But like, what's the thing that's controlling the 5 tools? Is your mindset and your brain and where you are there. And so to the extent that we can, I think that there's a ton of development that can go in that part of it. And so I don't know that development and competition and chasing, I don't know that they're mutually exclusive. I think done right, and I think it's hard, but I think done right, they're always sort of working together.
So then as far as bringing in the tech and some of the data that you get, what are kind of some of your core beliefs and what is most important and need to be focused on? Obviously, there's a time and place for all of it, but what are you guys kind of doing, and what is your process like as far as kind of collecting some of this information and being able to spit it back to the kids? Because, you know, everyone's different. I'm sure you have some guys who they want all the numbers, they want to know everything, and you probably have some guys who are like, I'm just here to play baseball. I don't need to know what a spin rate is, or right. I don't need to know what my axis is on this pitch, or my bat speed or attack angle, all those things. How do you kind of then, like, what's important to you guys as far as the data goes and what you collect and how you disperse it?
I think, first and foremost, I think that the data can really help the buy-in from the kid, right? Oftentimes it validates what we might think as coaches. Maybe sometimes it doesn't, but we're surprised by something. But I think more than anything else, I think that it can help. Because I feel as though you want the kid to be a part of whatever development plan you have for him, right? And you want to have a discussion with him about what are the areas that you feel like that you need to really work on and get better at. And what are the areas that you think you do well. And so, okay, now let's look at some of the data, and it might validate exactly what he said, but you might also be like, well, look, this is something that says is not exactly something that you mentioned, so can we incorporate this into it, right? I think pitchers oftentimes fall into that. They think their slider is like this super awesome pitch, and guys are slugging like 600 off it, and the average exit velo on it is like 92, and you're like, so dude, this pitch is not as great as you think it is, and so I think that that's one. But I also think one of the things that I bring up a lot is, and I'm a Red Sox fan, so I hate to bring this one up, but Brett Gardner, when he first came into the big leagues, was speed, contact, two-strike pest, that guy. And as he grew in his career, he learned how to get some lift. He started to hit with some power. And what I tell them is that, look, you are sort of who you are right now. And this is who the data says that you are right now as a hitter, right? Hey, maybe your average exit velo is like 84. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad player. But right now, that means that we can't be hitting baseballs at 30-degree launch angles, right? That we need to really think about kind of getting to the, low line drives, hard hit ground balls, low line drives just over the infielders' heads, that type of thing, right? And then as you get that, when you catch it right, you'll be able to drive it into the gaps and get doubles, but you're not the home run dude, right? If Brett Gardner had come up trying to play like Aaron Judge from day one, Brett Gardner, we wouldn't know who Brett Gardner is, right? And I think that that's a part of it. Like Brett Gardner can aspire to one day hit like Aaron Judge, who wouldn't want to. And I would tell our guys, hey, I want you to be able to hit like Aaron Judge as well. But right now, you're not that, right? And so let's be the best version of what you are right now. Let's take advantage of all the things that you do really well and continue to work on the things that are going to take some time. You're not going to be, you're not going to gain 20 pounds of muscle in 2 weeks, right? You're not going to go from, whatever, a 300-pound deadlift to a 500-pound deadlift in the space of 6 months. That's just not going to happen, right? Unless, you're putting needles in your rear end. But, I think that that's just not going to happen. So these are things that, hey, we're going to be the best version of who we are right now, but we think that we can get to this part of it. And I think that metrics can help them to know what the best version of themselves can be as well.
And how much does having those numbers and that data and the tools that give you that stuff speed up the development of those things, of going from, the guy that has speed to the guy that now understands he can be gap to gap, or even just understanding who they are as a player? How much does that speed up that process? And, kind of, I would imagine it shortens the development time period a little bit because you're getting the instant feedback. And then the second part of that question, I guess, would be, why does it seem some people in the baseball community are scared of the data or think it's a boogeyman that is tearing down from the game when, in my opinion at least, and this is completely my opinion, you may have a different one, it seems like we have more talent in baseball than we ever have before?
I think it's, well, to answer the first one, I think ideally it 100% shortens the developmental curve, right? I mean, I think even in the short term, I think it can help with outcomes without throwing a mile an hour harder or increasing the spin on your slider better. I mean, just look at pitch usage, right? I think that's super low hanging fruit. This pitch gets hit. It gets hit hard, right? So this is a pitch maybe that we flip over the plate when we have to pitch backwards because you seem to have command of it, but when you're trying to use it as an out pitch, it gets hit a lot, right? Hey, these are quadrants of the zone that this pitches, so let's try to go in there. For a hitter, these are the areas that you handle really well. These are the areas that you don't handle currently right now. So let's make our plan going up to the plate is let's go sit on 4, 5, 6, and something that shows up in 4, 5, 6. Those are balls that you do really well, right? And so I think it can, beyond getting any stronger or learning how to rotate a little better or do all of these different types of things, I think the data can 100% help the short-term outcomes and then hopefully the developmental curve. Why are some guys afraid of it? I don't know. I think it's probably a little bit of change. Maybe I think it's, I would probably liken it to a few years ago, my wife bought me one of those, these mountain, was it the Weber Smoky Mountain, right? Mm-hmm, to be able to smoke meats and do all these things. And it sat in the garage for 3 months because I was afraid that, I didn't know what the hell I would do and maybe set the house on fire. And so I think maybe it's just the unfamiliarity with it is something that scares guys away. I hope it's not just, this like conservative attitude. Well, this is how we always did it. This is how Joe DiMaggio did it, and that's good enough. Well, that might be really good for some, and might not be great for others. I think that there's 100% the opposite of it too, right? I think there's 100% of like using it as a crutch and not using the human element of it. I would argue that probably the teams at the big league level that have been able to combine it with good old-fashioned communication and relationships and all those, and combine that with, high-level analytics and things like that, are probably the ones that are winning at a much higher rate than the ones that have gone to one end of the spectrum or the other.
So then when you take some of this data and you kind of give it to them, I always say this, I guess I'm curious about your opinion on a sport like football. We're constantly watching film, right? You hear about it all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone always talks about, film review, film study for opponents. I don't feel like we have that same culture in baseball. Do you guys utilize film, and are you now with the data then showing them, hey, this is what it looks like on film, and having them watch themselves back or watch practice back? What does that look like?
We do a bit of it, not as much as football, right? But it's also, I think that traditionally video in baseball has been used mostly just for like motion analysis, right? I mean, it's just, you're not looking at like what's happening on the entire field. You're looking at a swing, a delivery, whatever it happens to be. And I think that we have, Kyle has definitely like done a pretty good job of like coming in, taking advantage of the, the AWRE cameras that we have around the field, the TrackMan camera that we have that gives us kind of a wider view. And we're looking at our jumps. We're looking at like sort of our ready positions as infielders and outfielders when the ball is, being pitched. We're looking at when guys have, gone and done a great job on a dirt ball read rather than not having done such a great job on it. And so I think that we're using it for things beyond just the traditional motion analysis part of it. But I also, all of our guys have access to their AWRE. They're always going in there and looking at it. Ep will come in and have those guys break down swings. I will send guys a little something, we'll screenshot some stuff and do a little comparison of, hey, this is, look at this big league hitter and look at you, and this is what connection looks like, and you've kind of like dropped your barrel below it as we're entering into it, type of thing. So I think, I don't think that we go like crazy with it, and certainly I 100% like Ep and Kyle are much more like into the weeds on it than I am, but it's, I think 100% we try to use the video part of it.
And how important is that for like real versus feel, almost like, because I'm sure there are times where you're working on something with a guy, or even just from a full team practice setting where like something, they feel like they're doing something, and then when they see it back, they can go, oh, wait, that isn't what I thought I was feeling or thought I was doing. How important is it for that piece of it?
I think that is too, right? But to touch on when we're in practice, like say a round of batting practice or stuff, I really, as much as I can, I try to give them external cues rather than internal cueing, right? The easy one again is like sort of the machine, right? The pitching machine, when you're taking like sort of high velocity, I mean, it has like an ungodly rate of spin on it, right? And so it's, you're talking to them about like, instead of talking to them about getting their hands up here or this and that, I talk to them about like, dude, I want you to hit a freaking ground ball that like hits 5 feet in front of you, right? And then boom, they get it, and it's a line drive into the right center field gap. Like, that's what you have to feel when it's, this high spin thing. On the breaker, it's like, okay, they're over the top of it, whatever it happens, kind of rolling over. I'm like, all right, look, I want you to just try to hit a high fly ball into the right center field gap as a right-handed hitter, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, it's this like kind of line drive, the ball flight that you'd want to see. And so I believe much more strongly in like the external cueing than I do the internal.
What, I guess then when you take kind of the all of this now together to wrap it up, the culture piece of it, the kind of the data and the development, how do you kind of segment the difference in mentality and approach from the fall, where you have this time and you're not in the competition season, and then you get into the spring and it's 56 games in what always feels like 2 weeks because it goes by so quickly, right, and things can kind of get left behind. How do you kind of go about making, the difference between those two seasons for your program, and how you make sure that things aren't, falling behind when you get into that sprint of the season?
I think you try to make the fall as challenging as you can, right? I think that the fall, a lot of it is obviously you're evaluating your team and especially this year with the whole crew of new dudes that we have, trying to evaluate them and seeing what those pieces are going to get to be together. I think the spring is, a lot of it is about like trying to keep them as much as you can on an even keel. I think that we could have done a much better job of that at some level or another last year, right? We started off like really, really well, and then we kind of scuffled, and we just couldn't quite put things together the way that I felt like we were capable of or wanted to in our conference series. And I think a lot of that is like we needed to do a better job. I needed to do a better job of getting them to be sort of, you know, kind of get back to neutral, right? Trevor Moat sort of get back to neutral type of thing. And so I think that during the season we don't spend a lot of time like mechanical stuff, this and that. I think a lot of it is like kind of feel stuff, that external cueing, and then more than anything else is just working on the mental game part of stuff, right? The daily approach, the idea that this is going to be hard. If it was easy, everybody would be winning conference championships, and so, you know, we're just going to do the daily grind and wake up every day with the idea that we have a new opportunity every single day.
And then my favorite last question to always ask head coaches is, if we could fast forward 3 to 5 years into the future, if everything goes how you envisioned it, what does this program look like, and what are some of the things that you guys have maybe accomplished?
Well, I hope that we've won an A-10 championship or two. I hope that we've gone into the NCAA tournament and, you know, make a run like old Danny Skirka did at Murray State. You know, he's one of my old OVC buddies back when I was at Moorhead. But more importantly, I think, you know, from a programmatical standpoint, that year in and year out that we are competing for an A-10 championship, that we are one of, you know, the teams that they just pick, right? You know, as being one of the top 2 teams in the conference year in and year out. I hope that our kids are graduating and really having like valued their experience at the University of Richmond beyond just the baseball part of it. That they look back at it 10 years from now and say that choosing to go to the University of Richmond was one of the very best decisions of their lifetimes, and that they are kids that you know, that really value everything that Richmond did for them, and that in some small way that our program helped them to become, you know, the people that they are at that point. That they're successful and, you know, really pillars of their community.
Coach Aoki, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thanks.